I'm
Yes.
sorry. I'm when I said eighth, I mean going into ninth grade.
Yes, sir.
But a little bit different of an age group. He's like college age, and you're just starting high school, and now you guys, from knowing each other, um, continued to stay close after this trip, right?
That's correct.
There were now when you saw each other, it wasn't just hey, I recognize him. It was you guys would talk, you would hang out a little bit. I think there was like a prayer service on Wednesdays at the church.
Yes.
Did you start going to some of those at that
We
time?
would go to some evening services on Wednesdays and Sundays.
A lot of times on a Sunday or after one of those prayer services, you might go to that. You might go out and grab a bite to eat somewhere.
Yeah, a lot of the families would. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
I said a lot of the families would. Yes, sir.
Okay. So was this you and John Broyhill going places, or was it like the two families going places?
I mean, it was always a combination. Sometimes he and I would go to dinner, on the weekend, or might go to a movie. Sometimes it was a group of parents. Sometimes it would be my parents would go on home, and he would take me home, but it would be with parents and friends and other people.
Other people from the church.
Correct.
Your folks, the Greers and the Broyhills, they really didn't interact a whole lot with each other, did they?
No, not that. I mean, outside of church, no, not necessarily.
Yeah, they knew each other from church, but beyond that, it's not like they're going on trips or
Yes, sir.
having dinner together, things like that.
Correct.
A lot of times, especially in those first, say, couple of years of high school, I think you said that that was a time when you and Mr. Broyle hung out a little bit more, say, as opposed to when you were in your later years of high school.
That's correct.
It was not uncommon for him to come over to your house and just hang out, watch TV, things like that.
That's correct.
In fact, probably more often going to your house than say to where his parents, where
Yes, sir.
and I'll clarify that a second too with the parents, because that his situation was had changed right around the time that you met him. Would that be fair?
Yes, his parents had divorced or were divorcing. I can't remember.
Right around the time that he was meeting you, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Mr. Broyhill became kind of a person that your family started to invite to different things. It would not be uncommon for him to attend, say, like holidays and birthdays, things of that nature.
No, he would usually stop by on Christmas Day. He'd spend Christmas morning with his family and stop by on Christmas Day during that time period. Um, yeah,
He'd come over and be part of your family gathering.
at times, yes, sir.
Your mom was very nice to him about sort of aware of they were aware of the fact that his parents had split, right?
I imagine they were.
Sort of not a big church. Everybody sort of knew what was going on, right?
Not a big town either.
Not a big town. Um, and so your mom sort of went out of her way to sort of include John in.
And she did that with everyone, but always overcooks.
Um, were you aware that Mr. Broyhill's father kin at that church
I believe so.
is something that you're? It's hard to speak to another person's aware like this. Did your parents? They were aware of that.
I mean, I think the deacons took up the money so everyone would see whoever was taking up the money or the collection. So I'm sure they were. I don't know.
In addition, with your family, there were and do things. Sometimes you guys would take trips to Hickory, and you'd go shopping, maybe hit a restaurant or two.
Sometimes shopping, oftentimes eating, going out to eat.
And I know you said you recalled him working at a. You have some recollection of that. You were also aware of the fact that he worked, correct?
Yes, sir.
once a year during that time frame, your folks would take you on a vacation for about a week, usually in June, to Myrtle Beach, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Broyhill was on that vacation, correct?
My sister, and so I was able to invite a friend at that point. So each year I would get to invite one friend.
Would you invite Mr. Broyhill?
Yes, sir.
And just so we're clear, I'm referring to the Greers as your folks. They had a daughter, I believe Lisa, correct?
Correct.
And you, to her, that's logically, but the
Yes,
way
sir.
you grew up. Did that weekly trip a number of different times with you and your family, right?
Yes, sir.
It became sort of like an annual tradition thing, right?
Yes.
For a while.
Yes, sir.
There comes contact slowed down a little bit. I think you said when
Yes, sir.
your house is not down the street from each other, that's for sure, right?
There's not much down the street from each other in Lenoir.
Yeah, they're probably, I don't know what, 6, 7, 8 miles away apart.
I've never measured it, so I'm not sure.
If you had best, just a guess.
Maybe a 15-minute drive.
Yeah, you wouldn't walk there. Have like a friend where they live around the corner. Together, someone's getting in the car.
Yes, sir.
When you finished high school at High Brighton, let me ask you about that. Now, High Brighton's a pretty decent sized high school, and
I think it has around 1,000 students.
yeah. Mr. Broyhill, he did not go to one of the public high schools, did he?
He did not, no, sir.
Were you familiar going up there with also some of the surrounding areas of Lenoir, like Hudson and things like that? Mentioned, and you not with him so much, that he had attended a called Harris Chapel
Yes,
Christian
sir.
Academy, I think, something like that, right? He was, in fact, it was sort of a, I won't say a joke, but he was like the salutatorian of his class, but he was in a class of 3, correct?
Yes, that used to be a joke around with him.
Yeah. And that's pretty, I mean, fairly close from hanging out with him and learning about him as much as you did. It's sort of like what that school was about. He attended small classes like that pretty much from the time he started school until the time he graduated high school, correct?
He did. Well, I assume.
You know where the school is and you've seen it.
Yes.
All right. When in your younger years, when you guys were hanging out, and as you mentioned at the time, Mr. Broyhill's parents were going through the split at that time. It'd be fair to say that the majority of the time if the two of you were going to hang out at one or the other's house, it was typically at your home. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
So you had certainly met his father on a number of occasions, but this wasn't someone like you hung around with and spent a lot of time with, was it?
Not a substantial amount of time, no.
You went, you finished high school and were accepted to and attended University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
That's correct.
That was an important connector for you and your wife because she went there as well.
Yes, sir.
You testified a little bit about that there were when you were at school, there's times like when a young person goes away to college, they certainly come home on breaks and in between. And when you would come home on those breaks, you'd make a point of always seeing Mr. Broyhill. Would that be
I would
fair?
usually see him. Yes, sir.
And I think you mentioned there were like maybe a couple of different times where he, two, maybe even 3 times, where he came and visited you as a student at Chapel Hill, correct?
He came up election night, 2004, and then he would visit again sometime during my junior year, and then once more, I think, sometime during my senior year, if I remember correctly.
That was your first time voting, at least in a presidential election.
Yes, sir.
Was that your first time voting?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to guess from the nature of this case and the testimony you've given, and what I've been able to learn about you, you voted for John Cary and John Edwards in that. You don't have to say, but you have sort of democratic principles, it sounds like.
I think that's fair to say.
Okay. When you and Mr. Broyhill hung out in Lenoir, would it be fair for me to say that that is not, at least not from your perspective, the dominant party in that area of the country, that area of the state?
The election results would say it isn't.
Okay. You and Mr. Broyhill would talk about politics and things. That was among the things that you guys would talk about, right?
Yes, sir.
And you shared a lot of the same beliefs and feelings about politics. Maybe not all, but
I would say that it evolved over time. I mean, when I first met him, he was a Republican, like almost everyone that I knew was a Republican. In fact, I can remember him and my mother like talking crap about Al Gore. I don't know if crap.
would it be fair to say that in, over time in hanging out with him and, sharing with him some of your ideas and thoughts and stuff, that you saw, like you said, an evolution in him? There was a change in him and his political beliefs. Would that be fair?
He used to say that once he paid attention, like really paid attention to issues, his views began to evolve.
And eventually you came to learn that he changed his designation from I think he had been a Republican to a Democratic voter, if you know.
I don't know when he switched. I mean, I know that he certainly began to express support for Democratic candidates. I don't know when he switched his registration.
He sounded like a Democrat.
Yes.
Would that be
fair to say?
It wasn't just about politics, so there were other social issues and things that the two of you would discuss at the time, right?
I don't know that, so. Yes.
That was.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We're going to get to it. You did talk that there comes a point where Mr. Broyhill comes out to you and tells you that he's a homosexual.
That's correct.
But back when you were in high school, that wasn't happening.
No, sir.
In fact, if anything, he's based upon the conversation. He was. Impression was, or at least he was telling you that he was not.
He had at least one person that he dated, a female that he dated during the time that we knew one another.
You heard of any of his? So you had at least heard of some of his girls he had dated. Have you met any of them?
Met the one.
Was that Jennifer?
I think so. Did
you ever meet or hear about Sarah?
He referenced her name. I did not meet her.
That was someone he knew when he was younger, before he started hanging out with you, correct?
Yes, sir.
Where you lived in Lenoir, was homosexuality something that was, I mean, you can't speak for everybody. Was it frowned upon in some circles?
I am positive that it was. Yeah.
Difficult for someone to come out in the community where you both lived.
I can't speak to anyone's individual journey, but I imagine that it would pose some difficulties. Yes, sir.
When you went to Chapel Hill, the environment, the issues that were being discussed, the things people were talking about, would it be fair to say that was very different from what you had grown up with in Lenoir?
Yes.
Perhaps that we categorize things a little bit too easy sometimes, maybe a little more liberal thought process than what was in Lenoir?
It was a college campus, so I would say yes.
When you voted in that 2004 election, but there came a point where this vice presidential candidate from that election, who had been a senator in this state, John Edwards, announced interest in running for the presidency in 2008, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you were a student at that point.
Yes, sir.
Were you studying politics in school?
I studied political science. I'd ultimately changed my major, and after a couple of tweaks and changes, ended up with media production.
And but you still had an interest in politics, I'm assuming,
Yes, sir.
because you volunteered to get involved in this campaign for him to be nominated as the Democratic candidate in that 2008 election, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, you gave us some testimony about meeting your wife doing that, but when you did it, you weren't chasing the girl like you did when you went to Daytona, right? You didn't even know her at that point.
I did not. No, sir.
This was just you wanting to volunteer your time into this campaign, and when you did it, you didn't. I mean, did you do it with anybody? Sometimes people will say, "Hey, let's go do this together," or was this something you did on your own?
Any specific reference or?
I mean, like sometimes you'll have a buddy or a pal, or you say, "Hey, let's go do this thing and volunteer," or did you just sign up for it on your own?
I signed up for it on my own, but the first rally, which was December 2006, your client and another friend came along for that rally because I was home over winter break.
Oh,
No.
okay.
That was December 20-something, I don't know, in 2006.
I'm a little confused. Was it in Lenoir?
No, we drove from Lenoir to Chapel Hill where he announced and then drove back.
I see. So you had been home on break, but you knew this thing was going to go on.
Yes, sir. I'd signed up to volunteer.
You'd already signed up.
Yes, sir.
All right. So and then you grabbed Mr. Broyhill and another friend.
I asked the two of them if they'd like to come along.
Would that have been the gentleman Nick that you talked about earlier, or
No,
somebody
sir.
else?
No, that was Ben Gutman.
Oh, okay. I have some questions about him. Ben's from Lenoir.
He is.
And so you took them back with you, and that was really your first official function that you had attended?
That would be, yes, sir.
Of course, they went back to Lenoir, but you were staying when you went back to school from the break,
Well, yes, when I was back from the break, I was in Chapel Hill.
and you were volunteering time in the campaign.
Yes, sir.
That's when you met Jamie.
Correct.
Now, she was a paid staffer at that point, correct?
Yes, sir.
She had not been out of school very long, but she was actually working for the campaign. They hire people, and they get paid. Some people get paid to do it, right?
Yes, sir.
And a lot of people just volunteer their time.
Yes, sir.
But she was a paid staffer at that point in time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you said that's, I don't know if it was by chance or something you asked for, but somehow or other, the two of you got connected where you were doing some work with her, correct?
Yes, sir.
But then she left to go work on a different campaign, right?
That would be November of 2007, yes, sir.
Senator Kay Hagan campaign?
State Senator at the time, Kay Hagan, was running for U.S. Senate.
State senator.
Yes, sir.
Was she to be a paid staffer as
Yes,
well?
sir.
The decision is made sometime by John Edwards that he's not going to run for president, correct?
That he's going to drop out of the race.
Drop
for
out of the
presidency,
race.
yes,
He was
sir.
in. I mean, he was running in the primaries, but it just wasn't working out.
Yes, sir.
So, sort of the campaign sort of pitches, it, folds up its tents but there's this reunion that you talked about, and that's when you meet, not meet, but that's when you sort of reunite with Jamie a little bit.
We were never, I mean, that was when we kissed and began to move romantically. It was not we were in constant contact in the weeks that, even after she left the campaign.
So even after she left, the two of you stayed in touch with each other. That's when you were talking about, like, you brought her the cheesecake and all that stuff, right?
Well, that was, yes.
This is before, this reunion thing is happening in the early part of 2008?
Yes, sir.
2008, and that was the year you're graduating from Chapel Hill, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're basically going into your last semester of
Yes, sir.
college. And two of you romantically involved after that reunion party, to the point where a decision is made to go work on this campaign in South Carolina for a different candidate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now this time you'll be a paid staffer.
Yes, sir.
As will she.
Yes, sir.
Linda Kettner,
yes.
Congress or something?
Yes, sir.
So the two of you sort of pack your stuff and head to South Carolina, which is where Ms. Hahn is from.
Yes, sir.
And get involved in that campaign. But that didn't last terribly long, did it?
No, sir.
Was it any particular?
We had disagreements over the strategy of the campaign. Saw other employment.
Now, you weren't like a couple living together at that particular point in time.
No, sir. We spent most evenings together, but I had a separate apartment. Yes, sir.
Right. And you worked for I think you said you did some freelance stuff, but did you work for a place called Adams Outdoors?
I did.
And Jamie became a waitress at a place called the Long Point Grill. Where is this was this in just outside of Charleston?
Yes, sir.
And somewhere in there, the two of you got engaged in June?
We were still working for Linda Kettner when we got engaged, which was June 18th. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So you must, what, about a month out of college?
Yes.
Give or take. You're now family in South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Mother lives. She was adopted, right?
She was.
And her parents, her mom and dad, had at some point in her life separated, correct?
Yes, sir.
Divorced or whatever. And so her mom remarried and her dad remarried, and so she had sort of two sets of parents, both living in South Carolina that she would visit and you would visit with her, correct?
Yes, sir.
And got to know her families. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When, not unlike a lot of families in America today, it's very common, right?
Yes, sir.
When you made the decision to get married, you had met a lot in between the time that you had left Lenoir and the time you were getting married. You'd met a lot of friends, I think you said, at Chapel Hill. You had other friends in Lenoir. Did you make some friends down in South Carolina?
We did.
But the individual that you asked to be your best man at your wedding was Mr. Broyhill, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it was on he came down a couple of times and visited you there, correct?
A handful of times, yes, sir.
And there comes a point where you, I don't know if you were married yet, where the decision is made to move back to Raleigh.
We were still engaged. We had
Still
not yet
engaged
gotten
at
married.
that point?
Yes, sir.
You're married in South Carolina though, right?
We were.
Because you had secured a job with the Sierra Club.
Yes, sir.
What did you do with them?
I was a fundraiser.
And at the same time or around the same time that happened, Jamie got involved with a, I don't know if you'd call it a not-for-profit, a thing called North Carolina's Against Gun Violence.
Yes, sir.
That was sort of headed up by a woman by the name of Lisa Price, correct?
Yes, sir.
She is the wife of Congressman David Price.
Yes, sir.
And she worked as a paid employee in that organization,
Yes, sir.
correct? It's sort of out of this that her company that she would find the Sky Blue strategy sort of arises out of that. Correct?
She had already been working towards starting it, but she needed a client, so yes.
That was her first client, right?
Correct.
When you moved here, I think you said you moved to Cary.
Correct.
And I think you lived in Windsor Apartments, correct? Sort of near Cary Crossroads?
Yes, sir.
When you did that, move there, now, and I'll get back to Mr. Broyhill in a minute. He would come and visit you there with some frequency, correct?
He would.
Like, on the weekends.
He would.
And you got to sort of hang out with the two of you a lot more than he had previous to that, right?
He did.
He met your wife at that, I believe, you had a grandparent that was ill.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
In hospice or something.
Yes, sir.
And you brought, was that the first time you had brought Jamie to Lenoir?
Yes, sir.
And was that the first time she was meeting your family?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And one of the people that she also met on that trip was Mr. Broyhill.
Yes, sir.
They sort of hit it off, didn't they?
They did.
When you went back to, were you living in Charleston at that time, you can recall?
When they met, when my
Yeah.
grandfather was bro.
So that's when she was with
Yes,
the thing,
sir.
and you were, had to been just sort of before you moved to South Carolina, right?
It was.
When you, that Mr. Broyhill would weekend, right?
Every weekend, but it was a lot of weekends. Yes, sir.
He'd come down from Lenoir and hang out with the two of you. And the three of you sort of became like three friends hanging out a lot together.
That's fair.
You get other friends, and you would associate with them. In fact, you would introduce him to a lot of the friends that you and Jimmy had made, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then they became Mr. Broyhill's friends.
Most of them, yes, sir.
A while anyway before you rent the house at 1705 Tealwood, right?
Yeah, we lived in there for right at 2 years. Was it? Yeah, actually a little over 2 years.
In fact, when you went to go look at that house, you, correct me if I'm wrong, you took Mr. Broyhill with you to go look at a place where the two of you might live. You and Ms.
To the new house we were moving into?
Yeah, right.
No.
You didn't take him with you to go look at the Tealwood house?
He would eventually go with us, but the first visit was just Jamie and I.
You just went and looked at it together?
Yes, sir.
You were, I think you made a statement to one of the officers about the house. It was, the two of you had pets and stuff. You were looking for a place where you could let your pets sort of run free, right?
Yes, sir.
You had like a little bit of a menagerie there, like a couple of dogs.
We had 2 cats and a dog at the time when we moved in there, yes, sir.
And this had a fenced-in backyard.
It did, yes, sir.
So, and you heard a lot of the testimony already. It's a very nice neighborhood, right?
It was.
And I asked some who didn't remember. I'll ask you. Do you remember the backyard had sort of like a little, I wouldn't call it a stream, almost like a ditch or something that runs in the
We
backyard?
had a fence, and then there was like an embankment down that fence. I mean, down behind that fence that would go into, there were trees and I think a little stream maybe.
You and your wife were very, well, what I would classify as modern people. By that I mean you communicated regularly.
Correct.
If you weren't at home or in person talking to each other, it was not uncommon for the two of you to, I guess, I'm probably going to say it wrong, so you can correct me. E-chat, or I think
Yes.
you mentioned something else. I message,
Yes, sir.
and I apologize. I don't know all the terms.
That's fine.
My kids make fun of me for that, so more than my kids make fun of me for that. But that was something that the two of you did.
That's correct.
Yeah, you'd have like afternoons where you could go for, I mean, you'd be on your jobs, but it's sort of one of the things that you do now, right? You can be working on one thing, and then instead of like getting on the phone and calling somebody texts you and you text back, and this can go on back and forth like through an entire afternoon sometimes, correct?
Yes, sir.
That was not uncommon for the two of you.
Yes,
was it?
sir.
You were asked to provide some of the electronic transmissions that you could locate from your computers as part of the investigation in this case, and you did retrieve some, and you turned them over to, I think, Detective Morris or somebody.
Yes, sir.
In this case, I saw, looking at some of them, wouldn't be uncommon for you guys to do 2-3 hours sometimes doing that, right?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk back to Charleston a little bit. When you went back to Charleston, when you were in Charleston, it was on one of these visits that Mr. Broyhill came out to you.
Correct.
And by coming out to you, I mean told you that he was a homosexual.
Yes, sir.
Would it be fair to say that at that time you weren't expressed to him that you weren't terribly surprised to find that out?
That's fair.
You suspected that he was a homosexual, didn't you?
He had during when I was in college, he had a male friend that they would go off on vacation, just the two of them, no one else, and things like that.
Brent?
So yes, and so there was some, and I'd met Brent before, and anyways, there was some suspicion, yes, that or not suspicion, that's not the right word, but there was an inkling as time went along.
Yeah, suspicion makes it sound like
It was an inkling.
that you not approve. You really did. There was no disapproval on your
No,
part,
sir.
or on Jamie's part.
No, sir.
It was like whatever you are, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were fine with it.
Yes, sir.
But this wasn't. It would be fair to say this was an issue for Mr. Broyhill, wasn't it?
I think it was a big moment for him, yes, sir. Or that
Because that would not be something that typically, at least in your experience, somebody does in Lenoir.
I did not know many out gay people in Lenoir, no, sir.
You were familiar with the people at least in your church anyway.
Yes, sir.
That would even be something that would have been frowned upon in the church at that time, correct?
I mean, I think that for the majority of people, that is a fair statement. The majority of the people within that church, to clarify.
Some people would even, in the Pentecostal faith, might even see it as sinful. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair, yes, sir.
When these things were going, these visits that Mr. Broyhill was making to the apartment in Cary, and they were, I mean, they were welcoming. I mean, you weren't like saying don't come. You were saying
No, absolutely.
come anytime you want. And he would take advantage of it. It was sort of perceived that it might not be a bad idea for him if since he's now come out to you and told you that he's a homosexual, to think about moving into this area because it might be a little more tolerant than, say, back in Lenoir where he lived. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir.
And I don't mean to trash a town here because you're not speaking on behalf of the population of Lenoir. You're telling me something based upon what you experienced and what you observed in the years that you grew up there.
Yes. I mean, to be fair, I'm very fond of my hometown, but
Sure, you went after this event. That was the first place you wanted to go. Was back home, right?
yes, sir.
So I mean, you're not. I don't mean to trash it. I'm just saying that if you're, at least what you knew about Mr. Broyhill, to be gay in Lenoir, in the church that he went to, in the house that he was raised in the area where you guys lived, it would have been tough on him.
I think that's fair. Certainly he expressed that it was.
So there was a lot of discussion about might not be a bad idea to come move out and live where you and Jamie were now living
That's correct.
here in the Triangle area.
Yes, sir.
When that happened, I think you said you started looking to see if there were some jobs in the job.
Yeah, we both asked around.
And at the same time, he had left Lowe's at some point and had started working for some company called Universal Mental Health in Lenoir.
Yes, sir. I've been in the Morganton office, but
In the what office?
he may have been in us, which is the next town over.
Okay.
But I'm not. Anyways, he.
In the area of where you grew up.
Yes.
That's where he worked, and then you were opening up something here in the Triangle, correct?
They either had an office in the Triangle or they were opening one up. I can't recall.
So while looking for jobs, he's also looking to see if he could maybe transfer.
At some point, he began to do that. Yes, I know. I think he had an interview down here before he began to have that discussion. But yes.
Ultimately, he did get the transferring bill.
Yes. Yes, sir.
And when he did, you opened your home to him. You know, he moved in the house with you.
Yes, sir. He needed to find a roommate.
And this was like 2009?
Yes, sir.
And this is after he's been there, I mean, multiple times. How long had you been in Cary prior to the time that Mr. Broyhill moved in with you?
Jamie and I moved there in March.
Of 2009.
Yes, sir.
So, what, 6, 7 months maybe?
Probably 6 months, 6 to 7 months. I think that's fair. Yes.
Before he moved in.
Yes, sir.
And of course, in those 6 to 7 months, we had all those weekends where he would come and visit with the two of you, right?
Yes, sir.
So he comes and he moves in, and you let him move into one of the bedrooms, and you're not even charging him rent or anything, right?
No, sir. We wanted to help get him on his feet.
Right. And he stayed with the two of you until sometime in February of 2010.
We helped him look for a place and helped connect him to potential roommates. You know, there were maybe once or twice where he expressed some interest in maybe moving back, that maybe, you know, Raleigh wasn't the place to be. So there was a lot of conversations, but finally he ended up moving in with a person that we all knew.
There was Paul Fox.
Yes, sir.
He had a place in North Raleigh, and he had a empty bedroom, so he rented a room and sort of shared expenses with him.
Yes, sir.
And somewhere in the midst of all that, Jamie started Sky Blue Strategy. She might have actually had it started, but prior to Mr. Broyhill moving there.
Yes.
And she hadn't really taken off yet to the point where she was ready to hire somebody when he initially moved in, right?
No, sir.
But she was picking up clients.
Yes, sir.
And that's sort of not uncommon in this political thing, because you heard some testimony through the trial. I mean, you could be in one day and out tomorrow. So someone who's your client today may not need your services next time around.
That's fair. Yes, sir.
But at the time, she was in one of those, I'm trying to get business, was getting some business, and reached a point where she thought this would be maybe not a bad idea to hire your friend who had been living with you and who had been, she had come to know as a friend.
So he had moved out and had been moved out for a little while. I'm not sure how long, because once he finally found a roommate. And then she started having a conversation about hiring someone, and she ultimately decided that she would offer it to him because he had expressed a lot of interest over the preceding couple of years of moving into the political field, of being involved in political campaigns.
Yeah, and I mean, and the two of you were, I mean, you kind of like, sort of like this hip couple. I mean, you guys are doing all these, I don't mean,
I'm not sure if we were hip or not.
I don't know about hip, but you know what I mean? You're doing all these social issue things. You don't have the normal job. I mean, you're not like just showing up at some place and punching a time clock. You're engaged in social issues. I mean, you're working for this. Were you at the Sierra Club still at that point?
Yes, sir.
You're working for them. They sort of promote a lot of environmental issues and things of that nature. And Jamie's working for this North Carolina Against Gun Violence. I mean, these are social issue things that you guys are working on and getting paid to do it.
Yes, sir.
When you do that type of work, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's almost sort of not, they're not mutually exclusive. Politics sort of gets tied in with it a lot, because a lot of times these social issues are tied in with laws that are passed regarding these issues, correct?
Yes, sir.
So you end up going to a lot of functions. You end up going to you meet a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
You and your wife had met a lot of people. I mean, you've already mentioned a few, and there were a lot more that you've met, and we're yet to meet still.
Yes, sir.
Some in very high places on both state, and some holding even federal offices, correct?
Yes, sir.
Or aspiring to hold federal offices.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Arbor, we'll
yes.
go ahead and break for the afternoon
That's fine.
and resume tomorrow morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume tomorrow morning at 9:30. If you'll recall the instructions again, please don't talk about the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters. Please have no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your notepads in your chairs. Thank you very much for your service, and we'll see you at 9:30 tomorrow morning in the deliberation room. On the 23rd. Well, you know what? I'll reserve, Judge, because I'll finish cross-examination of Mr. Hahn. That was brought up in his testimony. I think it raises an issue. But I'll finish my cross-examination. I'll raise it then. All right, very well. Anything else?
No, nothing else.
I thought she was scheduled.
Just with you.
Oh, wow.
All right, very good. We will then be in recess until 9:30 tomorrow morning.